Don't drink the water. Today, you're listening to Global Warning, and we are talking about the elixir that keeps all of us alive. Our bodies are made of mostly water, and it's a shame when you can't drink it. The song you were just listening to was Don't Drink the Water by the Dave Matthews Band. This is Global Warning on Free FM 89.0 Independent Community Media. And I am Stuart Schofield, host of this show. If you have any questions you would like answered about global warming, feel free to email globalwarning89.0@gmail.com. Again, that is globalwarning89.0@gmail.com. Last week I had former Mayor Margaret Evans and environmental scientist Kevin Wood on the show, discussing what we as Hamilton can do to stop this global catastrophe from becoming worse. And there were several simple solutions that Hamilton could do with just a little bit of cash.
I had a conversation yesterday with some people. I would love to see the canal idea resurrected. And people look at me askance. In the 1880s, right up to the 1980s, there were plans for a canal, roughly where the bend is in the Waikato River, where Waiuku is, to go straight through to the Manukau Harbour and then take a leg through the Waitemata into that harbour. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine how wonderful it would be to go by boat between Hamilton and Auckland? There we are. Think about that.
Absolutely. But when you're talking about trains and you're talking about moving people, public transport, we could run, even on a narrow gauge, we can get about 70 maybe about 120 k's an hour.
I'm talking 300.
Oh, I know you're talking about that, but in the interim...
They reckon they'll have 500 k's an hour within a year.
That's right, but in the interim, we haven't got anything between Hamilton and Auckland. But if you were to do that, to speed it up, you're going to have to block off all the crossings or have underground or a bridge over it. It's just too dangerous to run high-speed trains.
That is still a lot cheaper than the money that we've been spending in the last few years on our superhighways.
But Japan did it. Japan did it by putting in an extra rail and to make the wide gauge.
That's right.
And then when the time came and the trains came, all I did was put them on.
And China is doing its Belt and Road right across, linking the continents.
Yes.
And yet we're sitting here debating about whether or not we should put one on at all.
Yeah, and it's also kind of strange because the number of people, it's like 2 hours of traffic every day from Hamilton to Auckland.
3 hours.
3 hours? Sorry. But there's a lot of productivity lost as well because people aren't working. And that's, if you get people working, people generate money, money circulates more, it gets economy moving. So it's, if you think about it, it's actually silly just not to build that train.
Absolutely. And let's add to the value of trains. On trains, you can have a cup of tea. You can read a book. You can take your Wi-Fi. You can have a conversation. You can meet new people. So it's robust, wonderful type of travel.
But we're not
boring in a car.
We're not electrified. If the government, when it's made a decision, they should have electrified the train track right from Wellington right the way to Auckland.
Absolutely.
But they didn't do it. Now, to run those efficiently, and if you're going to meet your zero carbons, you're going to have to put in the electrification.
You know, it's funny, we're talking about the past. I found a newspaper article in the City Library, and it was dated somewhere around about 1914. And the Chamber of Commerce in Raglan had a public meeting which attracted about 80 people. It was quite a thriving, metropolis then. And the Minister of Transport was present because the locals wanted a light rail connection between Hamilton and Raglan and Hamilton and Kawhia. Light rail. And the minister said at the time if they dropped that idea, he would ensure that the road was sealed within 3 years. Well, it took 30 years and they'd never ever got their train connection. Interesting, eh?
No.
So, for those that might not know, what exactly is light rail? Is it just trains, pretty much, or...?
There's two definitions of it. One, as I understand it, is a tram, which is an electrified rail connection. Another one is just passenger rather than heavy freight. But I'm just an observer.
The trouble is with light rail, it can't run on the same track as where you've got heavy goods trains. and express goods trains. It's just too dangerous. So you virtually, if you're going to have light rail, you've got to put in a whole new rail system as such. If you're looking from Auckland, the Onehunga line could be light rail and go right around in a loop right round to meet at Papakura. That could be light rail. Over the shore could be light rail to connect at Britomart, but you'd have to put in an extra platform at Britomart to cover the light rail.
Mind you, you'd have to put in extra platforms anyway if we're going to do fast trains seriously.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, again,
absolutely.
right throughout the east now, your platforms, you step out of your train to the same level as the platform. So people in wheelchairs, pushchairs, you name it. It's
And going back to the bit of a disability, tune in Tuesdays at 11:30 for the Daily Challenges show. The show is hosted by Peter McLean, and he examines the challenges faced by everyday people with a disability. If you want to appear on the Daily Challenges show, please give Peter a call on 021 157 8656. Again, that is 021 157 8656.
It's just great. You don't need buses going up and down.
No,
you raise the
no.
platform.
Well, Wellington has done that. If you go to Wellington, the trains themselves, when they run, they're always at the same level.
Actually, they are too, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Yes, yes. And if they can run trains from Masterton through to Wellington, why can't we run them from Hamilton to Auckland?
Well, we're optimistic we're going to be, but I have to say, from what I know about the trial that Jamie Stranger's promoting very strongly, they're only talking about a sort of a 6:30 in the morning and a coming home after work. I think that's a bit strange. I would think they'd be much better off having more than one during the day, because it's not just commuters. I mean, the traffic jams are all day now. If you're going to Auckland and back, all day.
If you take if you were to put a train service on, it would be profitable, and it would be viable. If it went from here to, say, it had a couple of stops, say Huntly, maybe at the base, and then it stopped at Pukekohe, it could be an express one where it's picking up quite a few number of people from Pukekohe all the way to Auckland.
And that's where the traffic...
It would be full.
That's
and
where the jam is.
That's right. And it would only be certain stops that it would stop at. Not at every stop like every other train. If you want to get off one of the other platforms, you get off at Pukekohe or you get off at Papakura.
Oh, and there were local government leaders' climate change declaration. There was something to do with that, and mayors and chairs representing local governments across New Zealand on climate change. And could you tell us a bit more about that, Ms. Evans?
Yeah, you know, there's been global meetings and local meetings and regional meetings, and finally mayors in New Zealand got together. I think it was initially 2015, and decided that they would make an official statement in support of climate change and say that they would therefore take the themes and build them into their annual plans and strategic plans. This was resurrected last year after the election, 2017, and in December 2017, the new revised version came out, and it is interesting, and I haven't had a chance to ask him the direct question, but a noticeable omission in signing this declaration is the Mayor of Hamilton, Andrew King. So I don't know whether he was away at the time or just hasn't been picked up, but all of the local mayors signed it and the regional council chair. Now, without appearing to be too cynical, the measurement on all of this should be what those mayors have actually done as a result of that.
Yes.
And if you look across the country, it is really difficult to see any measurable difference as a result of them signing that rather lovely statement.
Yes.
So I guess on the one hand, we have to say it's great they've done that, but on the other hand, we have to say they've been very, very naughty at not actually being serious about it.
It's a bit like, how I feel a bit about the Paris Accords. They all signed the paper, and then America's pulling out. But they all signed the paper, and then it doesn't feel like anything's being done.
Absolutely. In fact, I sat down a couple of months ago and just Googled for an hour or two, and I went through all of the different United Nations agreements that had been signed up to by New Zealand. Mm-hmm. And I think that I reached something like 27. Then I went into the various websites associated with the UN, which dealt with the indicators and the progress reports. And talk about moving targets. When they don't meet certain indicators, what do? They change the indicators. And there's an absolute feast of stuff there. But has it made a difference to the world? That's the question we should be asking. And I just wish in New Zealand, past leaders over the last 20 years, so this is not a party issue, they've all been as bad as each other. They go off to these conferences, they mix and mingle with thousands of people. What was it, 30,000 people at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992? 30,000 people.
And it's a small town.
And yet, and this is repeated virtually everywhere. And I mean, I can take some blame because I've been involved in a few of them. They don't act as advocates when they come home. I have yet to find a piece of paper from the central government in this country to local government in this country urging them to keep faith with the international document that has been signed up on all of our behalf. They come home and they just forget, I think.
Well, the problem I see it is the fact that we've got no groundwork to work on. What we need to build is an eco-economy, one where ecologists and economists are talking. And at the moment, they don't really talk. Everything needs to be in balance, but you need to start somewhere. We can't keep using more resources than what can actually be. If you understand ecology, everything must have to work in balance with that. Everything works within balance within the ecology of a system. Well, it's the same with Earth itself. Everything has to work within balance. And you have to start somewhere where ecologists and economists are talking and starting to work out where the problems are, how we're going to deal with that, so that we can cut it back so that everything is working within balance.
I can't answer that question except by saying I just wish there was an injection that could give a big dose of passion into a lot of people. Because if you take, for instance, this thing called the Waikato Regional Council, I said to a certain councillor that I know quite well fairly recently, my God, you've got over 400 staff now, most of them scientists. Yes. And he said, and there's going to be more. Now, you have to say, if we've got that pool, and I'm sure they're all earnest about what they're doing, but they're either not doing the right stuff, they're not sharing it, or they're so buried in what they're doing, they forget that it's about the rest of us. So, we've got a lot of research. We've got piles of research, but somehow the research is not being linked to the decision makers. And, I'd love to see a really good poll of our local body representatives because, they're supposed to be governing and they're not doing it very well. And ask them what their views are about climate change and ask them whether they believe they are doing enough or whether they think they should be doing more. And if they're not doing more, why aren't they doing more? Is it because of the papers they're being dished up? Is it because they're bogged down with red tape? What is it? But, across the country, New Zealand is not doing well on climate change.
No, not at all. It's not at all. You've only got to look at Hamilton, for instance. You take your e-products. When you go to take them for waste, there's nowhere to dump them. Yet other cities in New Zealand, you can take your e-waste, but we're paying, it all goes into landfill. People are confused. They put their green bin out for waste, and most of it goes to the landfills. We need to work on recycling most of that, turning it into profitable
We need to
products.
Stop producing some of it in the first place.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a better one. Can I throw another one in there? This is, again, the submission our little group made to the City Council. if you take, for instance, the storm earlier this year that wiped out electricity to thousands of households in Auckland, and I think that there was something like 5,000 or 6,000 households that were without electricity for something like a week because the storm blew over trees, which knocked out the power lines. And because it was such an unusual occurrence, they just didn't have the resources to fix it. So we talked about this and thought to ourselves, we love the trees of Hamilton. We just love our trees. But you know what could happen is if we had a storm like that, some very earnest people would rush out and say, oh, we've got to cut down all our trees. It's threatening our electricity. And if you go through Hamilton East and you will see some of the barbaric way some of the trees have been pruned in order to keep the electric lines, safe. What's happened to the undergrounding program? Wouldn't it make sense for the council to work with Well Networks and Well Trust, who owns Well Networks, and do a massive undergrounding in order to ensure that that cause for electricity loss is not a problem? And I'll add in a further one there. I once read a report which showed that the major cause of electricity disruption in Hamilton is vehicles hitting lampposts. Well, again, that's another reason for undergrounding your electricity supplies. That is a climate change project.
Have electricity be underground instead of above the ground.
Absolutely. All of the new areas are already undergrounded. It's a requirement.
It's the older areas which have never been upgraded.
Absolutely.
But before, when it was one electric company run by the government, they were doing so many a year. But now there's so many different
But there's only one lines company, and that's our own local Well Networks owned by Well, and there used to be a major upgrading. And all it takes is for the council to forge a new relationship. So anybody that's listening, write to the council and tell them to do that.
And that comes down to local government. But I still think the only way to combat our global warming and climate change is by having an economy, an eco-economy. We need to have some groundwork to work on, some base to work on, taken to the government, and then they can say, right, we now know what we're going to do. But at the moment, nobody knows.
And this is a problem, isn't it? The individual sitting at home doesn't want to use plastic bags.
No,
but then you have to use plastic bags because everything comes in plastic bags.
There's no alternative.
There's no alternative. And you get worried about all sorts of things. And it's one of those challenges where collectivism is so important because we can't do enough on our own. We rely on local government, we rely on central governments, we even rely a bit on the United Nations. And a lot of that's not working properly at the moment.
And another thing with the plastic bags, even people that do find a way to use an alternative, it still doesn't make all that much difference because the issue isn't plastic in the ocean. The issue is the planet's heating up and we don't have a way to stop it. So McDonald's is now not handing out plastic straws, and people are like, oh my gosh, that's so great. And I'm standing there going, that doesn't mean anything. They're just doing less work. You would now have to go up and request a plastic straw because you can't have a drink any other way. And that's still not doing anything. The real issue is that the planet's heating up and we don't have a way to stop it.
Absolutely. And, you're describing the them and us scenario, which is so often what hinders progress. And I kind of think what McDonald's is doing is better than McDonald's not doing anything. But if you take that issue, I think what's worse is young people, particularly, who chuck out their McDonald's wrappers through the car window when they've finished eating. I also think there's a problem with food waste in this country. The food waste is unbelievable. And a lot of it's to do with red tape. You talk to supermarkets about the food that they throw out. We've got some social agencies now picking up some of that. I mean, it's patently absurd. If you're hungry, are you going to worry whether the use-by date was yesterday? There's so many elements within modern society that your eco-economy can pick up all of them.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's important that individuals get to do something that make them feel they're doing something.
But I would rather people feel like they're doing something and be doing something than feel like they're doing something and not be doing anything much.
That's what I was saying. If you take farming, for instance, you've only got to drive from here to Auckland, go up to Pukekohe, and if you look there at the land, what do? They plough it vertically. Instead of having horizontally where you're going to catch all the nutrients before they get into the waterways, they spend thousands of dollars each year taking that soil, which has come from the top, putting it up the top, it's now at the bottom, they put it up at the top again. But not only that, when you look at the waterways and the streams which are running into the Manukau Harbour, they're lush and green, and it's obvious all the nutrients are being caught and they're travelling down. I'd hate to say what the Manukau Harbour's like now, the condition of it.
I think one of the things you're identifying there is what has been loosely called the mathematisation of the world. An awful lot of ancient knowledge, which was just part of our living knowledge, has been lost as everything's become corporatised. The bigger things get, the more people are employed who have really very little to do with the overall operation. They just have a job to do, and they do that job. And I'm very prejudiced against farming, I might say, but in the right way. I'm the daughter of dairy farmers. And I'm very, very conscious that when I was a child, there weren't that many farm advisors or scientists or helping people from outside. And much of the knowledge on how to plough the land, on where to find the water, on where to put the trees to protect the cows, that was all just common knowledge that had been passed down through various descendants. Now, of course, you like to have a townie who's done a course in agriculture, who has no background whatsoever in that, but very, very enthusiastic. And so that little pool of knowledge is gradually being eroded. And that's such a pity, because I don't know how you fill the gap except through conversation.
No, well, I don't really know either, but I do know that ploughing the land, when you plough it, you're actually turning over all the organic material and nutrients back into the land.
You know that,
now,
but
that
the person that's ploughing the land probably doesn't know that.
No,
that's really the point. Now, how do we make sure that they do know that
by
without
listening,
a government department?
By listening to global warning.
All of that needs to change. It needs to change the way we're farming, our practices, even getting our vegetables, like how much wastage there is of just and loss of nutrients into, say, the Manukau Harbour. And not only is it at Pocono, you've only just got to keep driving out to Waiuku. It's all seems to be done the same way.
Intercity express trains, 300-kilometre-an-hour trains. Most of the currency that goes into transportation goes into merely fixing the roads of New Zealand. I believe it would be far cheaper to value public transportation and a train, or as Miss Evans said, a canal system to Auckland. And it always feels like, to me anyway, because the previous government or previous group in power many, many years ago failed to do something simple, such as electrifying the train tracks, it is always future generations that pay the price. Now, we today have to go to lots of extra effort to better our society, as opposed to making life simpler in the beginning. Hopefully, our children won't be saying the same thing about us. I completely agree with what they had to say about electricity. Right now, the current system is that power lines and electricity circuits are above the ground, where they are able to be hit by cars, trees could fall on them, or a storm could wipe out power to thousands. We need undergrounding. Wouldn't it be far more sensible to have electricity lines underground? After all, Miss Evans contends that the major cause of electricity disruption in Hamilton is because of vehicles hitting lampposts. This ties back to the issue they had last week with private vehicle ownership. I believe the sooner we upgrade to public transportation, the less pollution will be created. Electric trains or tiny taxis such as they have in China, a tricycle-type vehicle with one driver and a double-seater in the back electric vehicle. This could be wonderful for New Zealand. After all, New Zealand has tiny roads, and if we are not going to make them bigger, perhaps we should therefore have tiny vehicles. Tune in next week for the third and final section of this interview, and this interview and other great content are available at accessradio.org. Again, that is accessradio.org. And since we ended on a bit talking about trains, here is Long Train Running by the Doobie Brothers.